Welcome to the last in our series on land stewardship. This year's series we did with the Wimberley Library. Hopefully next year we'll be able to do it in person. And we were just talking about some great ideas for a series for next year. Before we start with Jamie's talk on creating a plan for your land, I'd like to talk to you about HELM. I think a lot of you already know what HELM is. Let me tell you a bit about HELM. It's a program that the Master Naturalists have where we will send a team out to your property to visit your property, talk to you about what plants you have, help you identify them, talk to you about problems like erosion or oak wilt, talk to you about how to be a good land steward, and talk to you about things like creating habitat for wildlife, and just a lot more. We've visited 11 properties so far. The landowners have all been uniformly pleased with our visits, very appreciative, and we've learned a lot as well, and we'll be applying that to future visits. If you want to visit, what you need to do is go to beautifulhayescounty.org, which is the Master Naturalist public-facing website, beautifulhayescounty.org/HELM, and there's a form there that you fill out, and we will get back to you and schedule the visit. And while you're there, beautifulhayescounty.org has lots of information. Encourage you to explore it. And then finally, if you missed the first two presentations, they're now on our YouTube channel. This crazy link here is maybe hard to write down real quickly. So all you need to do is go to YouTube, and if you go to YouTube and you search for Hayes County Master Naturalist, you'll find our YouTube channel, and there's a category called miscellaneous videos. And if you click on that, you just look down below here right now. The two are highlighted here, but you'll find those, and you'll find a bunch more videos that we've recorded. There's also videos that David Warmer, who's from his Nature Watch, that he does for the Master Naturalist classes. There's also things we've done for E-Nature for Kids, some short, quick, cute videos, like of a dung beetle rolling poop, things like that. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jamie. I think a lot of you know Jamie already. Jamie is a Hayes County Master Naturalist. He's also has a company where he helps people get a D1D who are trying to get a wildlife exemption for their taxes, helps them with creating a plan for that. He in his career he built guitars, so that's something a little different. But I'm going to just turn it over to you, Jamie. You can say anything else about yourself that I forgot.
Thank you so much, Christine. I really want to thank Christine Middleton tonight and Betsy Cross for helping me look good. I literally could not do this without their help. I was intimidated by the prospect of doing this on Zoom because I have, like Christine said, I've made my living most of the time with a chisel in my hand and not using technology that is any older than the 16th century. So anyway, I'm really honored and delighted to be here. Tonight's presentation is basically geared for owners of small or large acreage properties. This is not about creating a 1D1 wildlife plan for the county. This is more about small or large acreage landowners who want to view their property as a community as opposed to a commodity, with the intention of being good land stewards, trying to do things that are beneficial to the wildlife around here, also to increase their engagement with the nature that a whole lot of us probably moved out here to be a part of. And indeed, I have been a master naturalist since 2003. I was on the training committee for about 5 years. You know, that word master is an interesting concept. People call me a master guitar maker and a master naturalist. What I've learned as a master of anything is that anytime you become fairly knowledgeable about a particular subject, you also come to realize how much you don't know. And so it's sort of humbling. But anyway, I'm glad to be here. And I also want to invite all of my master naturalist friends. There are a lot of people in this group that probably could actually give this presentation. So as we go along and talk about some of these things, if you would like to give the group some of your ideas, some of your inputs, because I fully acknowledge that I am a man who doesn't know everything. And if you ask me a question that I don't know, I will simply say those three magic words, I don't know, because giving misinformation about anything is probably just not a good idea. The name under my picture is Martha Pinto. That's my lovely wife, who also helped make this presentation happen. One of the things I wanted to talk about is we all live here in Hays County. How did things look a long time ago, and how did we get to where we are right now? One of the things to think about is that in about the 1500s, when the Spaniards brought cattle over what is now the Texas-Mexican border, it forever changed the relationship of grasses and the grazers. And at that time, the Native Americans that lived in what we now call Texas had no concept of private land ownership. It is something that the Europeans brought with them and sort of have enforced on the Native Americans that have lived here for eons. And so one thing that's happened is that over time, the land has changed because of decisions that landowners have made for especially the last about 200 years. One of the things that we all are having to deal with is, for example, Martha and I bought our land from a woman, and then she had bought this land from someone who's a previous owner, and on and on and on until you go back until it wasn't owned by anybody. But we are all affected by the decisions that those previous landowners made. We have to remember that when we make decisions for our land, they may be decisions that affect future generations. And one of the things that we have to do is essentially don't be in a hurry. You can take this as slow as you really want to. There's no reason to be in a panic about it. And there's probably, before you decide on, there's no real final plan, but as you get together your plan, there's probably a few things that you might want to consider. There are a few things that part of the ecosystem is made out of the abiotic components that we actually don't really have a whole lot of control over. And those are also the same abiotic components that determine what ecoregion that we live in. Texas is divided into many different ecoregions, and although we are all at about the same latitude above the equator, we have many different kinds of lands. We have the woodlands, we have the deserts, blackland prairies. And so we happen here to, of course, live in what we know as the Edwards Plateau. And one of the things that we will, several of the things that will determine the different ecoregions, for example, one is, what kind of soil are we living on? Most of us in the Edwards Plateau are living on a limestone substrate. And of course, the soils that the plants grow in is certainly one of the more determining factors of what plants actually want to grow there. Another component that we don't have a whole lot of control over is precipitation. For example, today, my goodness, it's been a long time since we've had a whole lot of real measurable precipitation. But today, I just went out and looked before the presentation, and I got about 1.5 inches of rain. And so, that doesn't sound like a big rain, but when you actually think about the fact that an acre foot of water is about 326,000 gallons, and if you divide that by 12, that's about 27,000 gallons, and then multiply it by 1.5, and that's about 40,000 gallons per acre that I got on my small 5-acre property. So that's like 200,000 gallons of water that fell out of the sky just on my place. And so I'm very grateful for that. The plants are looking really good. But one of the other things that we really don't have control over is topography and the elevation. For example, we could be at the same latitude above the equator, but be at 7,000 feet, like in the Chizos Mountains, and it looks a whole lot different than it does around here. Also, topography makes a difference. For those of you who are small and large acreage owners, we understand sometimes that if you have a south-facing part of your hill and a north-facing part of your hill, the south-facing part of your hill is going to get more sunshine overall. It's going to probably be a little bit drier. As a result, you might actually have slightly different plant communities that grow on the north face of your slopes and on the south face of your slopes. That actually makes a pretty big difference. The other thing that we don't have a whole lot of control over is the temperature. The average temperature here in Central Texas is certainly a little bit cooler than it is out here, out in El Paso. As we've all noticed, I think I know a lot of your, in my generation, we've seen a lot of changes over the last several decades. I remember August being a month where it wouldn't rain every day, but about 3 days a week, we'd have these big thunderstorms roll in and cool things down. I'm just, as I've grown older, I've seen summer grow into September. And of course, those are not things we can actually control. So anyway, making a plan for your land is basically just a scientific way of determining what you're going to do. It's like I said before, you don't have to be in a hurry, but there's a few things that you might want to do as you consider making that plan. One of the first things that I would recommend for any landowner is essentially doing a species survey of the grasses, the woody plants, and the trees. And the reason for that is that if you don't know what you have, I don't really know how you can manage it. Once you start learning the names of all the plants and the trees and stuff, not only do they become your friends, but they are also, once you know the name of something, you can actually look it up, you can ask people about it, you can study it, and you can actually determine if it's actually going to be beneficial for your plan or probably something that may not be so good. The other thing that I think would be really important for everybody is to determine what, if any, invasive species that you might have on your property. But right now, let me clarify a couple of terms. So let's talk about a native plant. What in the world is a native plant? Well, most botanists that I've talked to will agree that plants that we call native around here were probably plants that were here when Columbus arrived in 1492. We don't have any written records prior to that of plants because the Native Americans did not have a written language. They did have hieroglyphs, but most of the plants that they depicted in those hieroglyphs were food species like corn and cotton, and also creatures like jaguars and eagles that they considered to be have superpowers. And so we don't have a record too much before the 1492 of what plants were around here. And of course, it took a long time to do enough surveys. In fact, we still don't know all the plants that are in the United States. We're still learning new species all the time. So the other way that we determine how plants are native is people do core samples in sediments that have been undisturbed for a really long time. For example, a whole lot of misinformation goes out about ash junipers, which are commonly called cedars. Now, we know that they are a native species because they were decidedly here when Columbus was here, but also when people do core samples in these undisturbed sediments, they can find pollen that becomes part of the soil record. And it turns out that pollen from what we know as cedars, or actually called ash junipers, has sort of showed up in the soil record almost 12,000 years ago. They were not brought in here by Spanish missionaries, space aliens, German immigrants, any of the stories you may have heard. You could do a whole Zoom talk just about the biology in man, especially ash junipers. So when you go to remove the invasive species, one of the things you need to do is decide to remove them in a very careful manner. You have to decide, mostly using large equipment for small areas is probably not a good idea. So mechanical removal with loppers or chainsaws can be helpful. Every so often, herbicides can be a valuable tool, but make sure you learn a lot about that herbicide before you use it, because like I said at the beginning of the presentation, one of the things we don't want to do is cause problems either for other people currently or for future landowners. So I have some pictures here of some properties that I've been lucky enough to visit. And many of them have land management implications. Some of them are decidedly land that is really coming back to health after being overgrazed. And some of it is a problem in and of itself. And you'll see when you see the slides. This is a property, what is now sort of a wildlife corridor here in Hays County. It is, like most of Hays County, used to be a farming operation or a cattle operation. And this is where cattle were grazed for decades. When I go out to a property, one of the ways I determine how healthy that property is, the grasses that are there and also the grasses that are not. For example, what I'm seeing right here is back towards the tree line, you see a whole bunch of little blue stem, which is one of our climax grasses. I'm seeing some Texas wintergrass and some silver blue stem. And so this appears to be, based on the history of this land, a land that's coming back to health. The cattle were taken off this property, I believe about 10 or 15 years ago. This landowner has decided to manage it for the benefit of native wildlife. And so for me, he's actually doing a pretty good job. For any landowner, whether you're a small landowner or a large landowner, it's really important to consider the biodiversity that you can create on your property, because a monoculture is not considered a healthy landscape and does not really benefit that many creatures. Okay, this is actually the property of our next door neighbors, and it continues to be grazed and it continues to be overgrazed. One of the ways that you can determine property is actually getting less healthy as opposed to more healthy. When a property is moving toward health, we say that it's moving towards a climax situation. In other words, there are certain species of plants and grasses especially that are considered climax species. These are basically self-sustaining species that have reached a point that where they really are self-sustaining themselves, but also they have the ability to sustain a whole lot of creatures. When you think about it, grass and its byproducts feed more people and animals on planet Earth than any other plant. When I look at this property, I do see a beautiful sunset, but I don't see any little blue stem. I don't see any big blue stem. I don't see any yellow Indian grass, no switchgrass. I do see a whole lot of bare spots coming in, a whole lot of lesser desirable forbs that are moving in. And so what's happening here is the land has been used a little bit too hard to make money on. And as a result, the land is becoming degraded, more invasive species. The tree that you see in the foreground and all over the back, those are actually mesquites. And I don't really have anything against mesquites. They are a native tree. But native species can also be considered invasive species, much like our ash juniper. But left unchecked, this will become, over time, a mesquite thicket that will shade out the grasses, reduce the productivity of it, and turn it sort of into more of a monoculture of mesquites and small forbs, as opposed to what the landowner hopes, which is to have land that supports cattle. If you are in the cattle business, you're basically a grass farm, because if you take care of the grasses and you provide enough water and of course medical support, then the cows pretty much take care of themselves. And so anyway, this actually puts me in a sort of a hard position, because it's really hard to talk to your neighbors about what you think might be some better choices for their property, because you don't want to act like a know-it-all, and I'm certainly not. But also, it would be good for them to, I would love it if Helm would go to their land and talk to them about how they could be make their land more productive and actually be more beneficial to their production. Oh man, this just breaks my heart. This is a property that I bet some of you have driven by. This is a property that I have done bird surveys on for 10 or 15 years. It is prime golden cheek warbler habitats. It's oaks, ash junipers, a number of different kinds of deciduous trees. I mean, it's just a wonderful habitat, or it used to be. This is what happens when land changes hands sometimes. We don't really have control over what our neighbor might do. So when I sent a former owner of this land a picture of this, he was just heartbroken. In my opinion, what they've done is generations of ecological destruction. They've essentially eliminated the entire understory. They've left a few oaks, but they did this with large equipment. And so we won't know for another year or two how damaged the oaks were by taking these heavy machines over their roots and compacting the soil around them. Trees live for such a long, long time. It often takes them a year or two or even more to actually show signs of distress after something bad happens to them. And so here in Hays County, if you have more than 5 acres and you want to bring on heavy equipment, you actually, believe it or not, you have to pull a permit and present a plan to the county development office. And not that many people know this. And if you notice that someone is doing such a thing and you know the address of the property, you can call them. And we did this had some good effect, and they will come out and sort of stop this and ask them, to go ahead and make the plan. But to be real honest, once this has been done, it's going to take at least a couple of generations. It won't be in this man's lifetime this will ever look. What constitutes heavy equipment could be bobcats, bulldozers, skid steers. As long as you don't drive them underneath the drip line of these trees, these big trees are probably going to be okay. But a bulldozer is not a very selective way to clear land. It sort of clears everything out. Now, if you have a monoculture of a whole bunch of, say, for example, prickly pear cactus, which is a wonderful wildlife plant, by the way, but every so often it'll just sort of take over some rangeland and create a monoculture. And every so often bringing in something like a bobcat to essentially round all that stuff up so that you can increase the biodiversity is a really good idea. You know what? This is a different location, but it's pretty much the same thing. This is about 20 acres of destruction. And this comes from this land ethic that we were taught a long, long time ago, and we're changing it, that, it's our job to basically control the land as opposed to work with the land. I think that there's a change of ethic happening all across Hays County and across Texas, where we appreciate the world we live in, and we feel that we want to be part of nature and not apart from nature. Okay, this is that same land as the first slide, and it's actually pretty disturbing, because what they've done is they've basically taken a lot of the debris and put it down into what is the interior of a wet weather creek, and then they burned it, and so all of this is going to invite erosion. If the neighbors of this person end up with a whole lot more topsoil than they used to, they can thank him if they want. One of the things that we have to remember is that soil comes in different layers, and what we call topsoil is the most productive layer of soil, and it's also the layer that's at most at risk. In a situation like this, it already has matured microbes, a whole miles and miles of fungus that help the first thing that will happen is the topsoil will erode, and then it cannot support the same species of plants that used to be here. There'll be a whole different community of plants that come in. And including, this really opens the door. Most invasive species have windblown seeds, and as a result, they're the first ones that come in whenever we put a scar on the land, or Mother Nature does. Mother Nature does not like a void. It likes to fill in holes and fill in spaces, and sometimes that is indeed with invaders. The next slide, please, Betsy. This brings up the point of what we call carrying capacity for your land. In other words, how many animals can you have on your acreage and keep the animals healthy as well as your land healthy? This is a place that's called a farm down in, I think, in Rolling Oaks. If you look in the back part of this picture, there's a pile of hay, and there must be 20 sheep and goats that are back there eating it, because they've eaten just about everything they can eat on the inside of that fence. They have eaten. Around here, the Texas Parks and Wildlife and all the ag people at A&M recommend what we call one animal unit for every 10 acres. And that's basically a cow and a calf, or a horse and a foal. But obviously, whoever owns this particular property, whenever it rains, their rocks get bigger. So I call them rock farmers. So anyway, I would have made a different decision, not only for the animals, but for the land. If you're a horse owner, you know that horses, their favorite hobby is to walk around and pick at grass all day long. And it's not that they necessarily need nourishment all day long. It's just that that's what they like to do. If you put horses on the land like this, it's very possible that the behavior of the horses are really going to change, and you're going to wonder why. And it's because you've basically taken away what they like to do all day long. You know what? This is another place that's making my heart happy. There's some KR. This is the grass in front is an invasive grass called King Ranch bluestem. But you can actually see a transition happening where the little bluestem is getting, the KR is getting less. The little bluestem has the plants are vigorous, they're tall, they're happy, they're healthy. And over time, if I came back to see this property in 5 or 10 years, I'm quite certain that the KR bluestem might be there in a small quantity, but this will be mainly a pretty healthy rangeland. And one of the reasons that little bluestem is called a climax grass is because the forage value, it's very high in proteins. Some of the ranchers call these grasses ice cream grasses because if they let a herd of cows out into a healthy field of grass, the very first ones they go to are the little bluestem, the big bluestem, the switchgrass. Only recently, in the last few years, the Ag Extension Office has recommended people not essentially scrape land clean and put in coastal Bermuda or other grazing grasses, because they are trying to switch back to the old ways where people actually rely on the native grasses. But this is another view of that wet weather creek that has all that debris in the middle of it. So what's going to happen is that creek will be occluded. Any flooding event will actually be worse and cause more erosion on that property. Yeah. The other thing they did is they burned this in several places, and they also took a lot of this and put I don't have a picture of it, but there's places where they put about 7 or 8 inches of mulch. Oh yeah, you can see some of that at the bottom. They basically brought in, there's a machine that you can bring in if you want, and it basically tears down a tree and mulches it on the spot. Only the mulch is very, very thick. And if your intention is to not have anything grow there for several years, then that might be working for you. But if you do intend for something to grow there, it's probably not a good idea. So Betsy, let's go back to a face view of me just briefly. Not that I'm pretty, but I just wanted to talk to them about some ideas for their properties, small and large. For people who live in more of a suburban neighborhood, we have some lovely neighborhoods in and around the Wimberley area. Wood Creek is cool, Wimberley Hills, Paradise Hills, and Paradise Valley. And these are not large acreage properties. But people who own properties like these can also make decisions that are beneficial, not only to themselves, but also to the creatures around here. One of the things that can do is consider reducing the size of your lawn, especially if you're not on well water and you're on city water. I know the water bills around here are pretty high. The other thing that you can do is you can replace that existing lawn with essentially xeriscape plants. You would want to choose plants that are deer resistant, that are drought tolerant, and especially for plants that are near your house, you want to consider wildfire safety. One of the things that's really important to do if you make a plan and you're doing stuff, especially 30 yards around your house, is consider reducing what we call ladder fuels. Probably not a good idea to plant burnable trees right underneath the eaves of your house. If you do want to have a lawn and you feel like you don't want to have St. Augustine anymore, The two native turf grasses that grow around here are called buffalo grass and curly mesquite. And you can get a mix of those. You can buy them individually. Again, you would save water on your money on your water bill. Also, the flowers of these grasses are actually beneficial to pollinators. It also provides a food source or habitat for all kinds of creatures. Another thing that we can all do is create a pollinator garden. It's a real easy thing to do. Basically, just designate a part of your property, probably away from your bird feeder, because some birds like to eat. Essentially, choose plants that would be beneficial to butterflies. You can choose plants that are not only provide pollen for them and also nectar as a food source, but also plants that would be a host plant for the larvae, like certain kinds of milkweeds are wonderful for butterflies to deposit their eggs on. It's also fun because you have just a view of all these pollinators that are coming in. This year I had a monarch moment, which was pretty special to me. I had found a monarch chrysalis hanging from a ash juniper, and I cut the branch and was able to witness the metamorphosis that is just, as close to magic as it can possibly be. And then Martha took a picture of the butterfly on my hand just as I set it free. And I imagined, like going to sleep for 8 to 15 days and waking up, and I'm not a slug anymore. I'm a butterfly. And man, I don't want to eat, plant leaves. I want to eat the nectar. And holy smokes, I got wings. I can fly. Anyway, pretty amazing. So another thing that any property owner can do, if you have a place on your property that water collects after it rains, one of the things you can do to increase the percolation of that water down into the aquifer and into the soil is essentially plant that area with grasses that have real deep roots, like eastern gamma grass, switchgrass, yellow Indian grass, again, big and little blue stem. If you want to add some color to it, Maximilian sunflowers are a very hardy flower. They have deep roots. They're also really beautiful and a really good wildlife plant. Another thing, some of you may have seen a presentation, I think it's been 2 or 3 months ago, for the Master Naturalists, where a guy from a company called Ten Eyck talked to us about creating pocket prairies. Now, pocket prairie is essentially a small version of a big prairie. It will have healthy grasses, forbs, and it will be a wonderful place for not only pollinators, but all kinds of birds. For example, if you want certain birds to be around your house, like if you really like painted buntings, just a hot tip, they really like cupgrass. And so if you wanted to plant more cupgrass on your property, then you'd probably see more painted buntings. The other thing that's important is to, in fact, right now, this week is a good a good time to go out on your property after one of these big, heavy rains and see where the water flows on your property and see if there's any erosion issues that you need to address. There's many different ways to address erosion problems. One of the things that you can do is, if you have a whole bunch of ash junipers and you are and you have a plan for cutting them, I definitely don't like clear cutting anything. You can actually take those ash junipers and lay them contrary to the slope which the water is running down, and they will slow that water down, help it percolate down into the soils. There's a number of different ways that you can do erosion control. Again, I want to give a shout out to the beautiful hayescounty.org and to the Helm Group. They have good answers for helping you enact erosion control. Another thing is that water is a big draw for wildlife, and for larger landowners, I mean, if you're lucky enough to live on a creek or a river that runs most of the year, then man, you're doing pretty good. But not everybody has that beautiful feature, and so for small property owners, even something as small as a bird bath or just a small pond. Martha and I have a small pond with a solar pump. It's not only does it sound good, but it's definitely a draw for wildlife. And if you're a big landowner, you can actually, there are several different plans for creating rainwater collecting guzzlers. Quick description: basically, imagine a small structure that has a a roof with an angle on it, and you put a gutter on the downside of that and a tank underneath. When it rains, the tank fills up because the gutter fills the tank, and then you put well, you can just go to the feed store and you can get a watering station that's often made for a chicken coop that has a little float valve in it. As long as we get rains, then your guzzler will also always have water in it. It's really fun to put a game camera up near a water feature because you can see what kind of creatures are actually coming to your property. In fact, another really good idea for especially larger acreage landowners is to create what we call photo points. Basically put a T-post or marker someplace on your property and essentially go take the same picture once every 3 months. And you won't notice much change. You'll notice a change in seasons, but you won't notice much change from your management decisions. It'll take a couple of years, but it's nice to keep a record of what you've done. And you can also keep a record of what's working and what's not. It's always a good idea too, to keep what's termed an incidental survey of creatures that to essentially we keep a small notebook on our kitchen table. And whenever we see something interesting, we just write down the date and write down, saw 5 turkeys today, saw 4 deer, and 2 of them were bucks and 1 of them was a doe. So anyway, it just gives you an idea of what's actually living out on your property. The one things that you want to do is stay away from some of the plants and trees that are promoted by some of our landscape companies. Some of the ones that I really don't like very much at all, and it will escape into the world, are Nandina, ligustrum, Chinese tallow tree, China berries, and there's a host of others. This is a riparian zone that is on Cypress Creek off of Red Hawk Lane. Again, the landowners on Red Hawk have sort of created a wildlife corridor. Many of them are landowners that love working with the land and love the native species that it supports. You can see that this has a whole bunch of switchgrass right on the water line. That grass is exactly what you want to be where it is because it's a stabilizing plant. It's not a colonizing plant, it's a stabilizing plant. And that's what you want to look for on in riparian zones. It has really deep roots. So when we get the next flood, and we will, that grass will simply lay down for a little while. And when the water goes down, it'll pop back up again. And guess what? It'll hold those soils right in place. So anyway, this is a really good example of, you have the grasses, you have the understory. Those look like box elders underneath there. And then behind it, we have our classic oak trees back there. This is also a waterfront property. A lot of times people, when they buy waterfront property, and we've all seen it, the first thing they do is take out the understory because they want a view of the river or the creek. And then they mow or take out all of the native grasses because they want to put something they're familiar with there. And unfortunately, most often it's St. Augustine, which is a grass that requires a heck of a lot of water because it's not from around here. This particular landowner is on Onion Creek. And instead of mowing down the grasses and taking out the understory, he basically created pathways so his family and guests could walk down to the creek and enjoy the water. Can also enjoy the creatures that survive in that riparian zone. When you think about a riparian zone, it's a place where water flows most of the time. And so if you're going to look for birds, the first place I might want to go is to a place where there's water. So we do bird surveys on this property every year. And it's actually a property that has a wonderful diversity, not only of plants, but also of birds. When you think about it, different plants give different food sources for different creatures. So the biggest variety of plants you can have on your property, the better. And you can determine what types of plants want to grow on your property by calling up the Hays County Soil Survey. All of our soils are basically limestone based, but they have differences. Each different soil type promotes growth of different types of species. And if you look up the Hays County Soil Survey, not only can you find a map of where your property is and what soils you're living on top of and managing, it will also tell you the community of plants that want to grow there in a climax environment. One of the gifts of managing your land for the benefit of wildlife is something as simple as this just sublime creature that we all know and love as the migratory monarch. You know, there's still some mysteries about butterflies that we don't quite understand. We're not really sure how they navigate. You know, it's pretty amazing the fact that this butterfly, based on the colors, it's not real bright. It's not real vibrant colored. It's probably one of the ones that came up from Mexico to deposit its eggs exactly on the plant that it's on. And then its great grandchild will end up in Wisconsin or Canada and end up at the end of the summer flying all the way back about 2,500 miles to a small forest in Mexico that it's never seen before and overwinter and then fly back north. So anyway, that's one of the gifts of managing your land for the benefit of nature. You know what? This is another riparian zone. Again, it's not the same landowner. It's a different landowner there on Red Hawk Road. This is a good example of management of a riparian zone. You can see that the grasses have not been taken down short. It's not mowed clean. And especially if you have cattle or livestock on your property, you probably want to leave a good, I would say, a 50-foot buffer of native grasses and forbs, because it will filter out any contaminants that the cows may leave, and also also slow any erosion and sediments. The sediments from erosion will actually fall out and become topsoil as opposed to get down in that creek. And so this is what I really like to see when I see healthy riparian zones. This is a place that you guys are probably familiar with. It's one of my favorite state parks around here, Pedernales Falls State Park. This is actually an autumn shot, probably taken a year and a half ago. This is actually a pretty healthy riparian zone, except for one particular plant. If you look on the left, you see something that looks like reminds you of bamboo. It's in the same family. It's called giant reed. This is one of the most invasive species that we have in Texas waterways. It is not native. It grows really fast, and it's really hard to get rid of. It's hard to control. It's actually so invasive. This is called giant reed. It's actually illegal to transport this plant in your car or your truck across the state of Texas because of how invasive it is. I fully understand budgetary concerns. When I brought this to the attention of the park supervisor, he just said, Jamie, we are well aware of it. We just don't have the money and the time and personnel to take care of every single land management issue that we have. So I completely get it. And that's often a concern for the rest of us is our budget. But, it doesn't take a whole lot of money to be a good land steward. It basically just takes caring for your land. And, like I said at the very beginning of the presentation, you don't have to be in a hurry. You can get a lot of help, make use of the resources that are available. This is the Pollinator Garden that Martha and I created. If you want to choose only one plant for your pollinator garden, this is called Greg's Mistflower or Purple Mistflower, available very easily at the local nurseries. It grows really fast, and it grows about 2 feet tall. It blossoms just about all summer. And as you can see, it's a major draw for just about any butterfly species. These are actually a species called queens, and they sort of mimic the colors of monarchs. But that's just another gift that you can get for managing your land as for native habitat. Again, another riparian zone. This is actually a property in Tom Green County that a couple of years ago, the spring flow was so amazing it had almost like geysers coming out of this creek. And the landowner whose property, his family had it since 1905, wanted to document this thing. But this is a place where the cows got pulled off the property a long time ago. It has wonderful pasture lands, and again, a very healthy riparian. You know what? This is actually a pretty good looking prairie right here. We've got mostly tall bunch grasses, and it looks like we have silver blue stem, little blue stem. This is actually probably a spring shot on one of those foggy mornings that we have around here. You don't have to know the names of these plants, but you can actually see the diversity in that plant community. Anyway, what a wonderful place for creatures to make a home. This is a property with a nice view over the western part of Hays County. This is another property that I consult with. Several years ago, we got a prairie mix and put it out in this field over here. And so we currently have a huge diversity of different grasses coming in, and we're starting to get some of the climax grasses coming in. There's indeed some yellow Indian grass and little blue stem down there, but it's also got a host of beneficial forbs and woody plants, some shrubs that put out berries for birds. So it's a place where they have taken not all of the ash juniper off it, but a good bit of it, but they didn't do it through bulldozing it. They did it through essentially careful management over the course of many years. All right, well, I'm going to go. I didn't realize I was going to talk. In fact, I have more to say, but I think that's the story of my life. I want to tell you how much I appreciate everybody for joining us tonight. Again, the Wimberley Library, Hays County Master Naturalist, specifically Betsy Cross, Christine Middleton, and my wife, Martha Pinto. This particular slide simply has resources that you might avail yourself to. The Native American Seed Company, most of you are already familiar with. If you're not, you can call them on the phone and get one of their catalogs. Not only is it a catalog, but it's also a wonderful resource for land stewardship. Lbj Wildflower Center, a wonderful place to, especially if you want to learn something about a particular flower. I've always appreciated AgriLife Extension Office. If you call them, they might have a volunteer that would come out to your property. Native Plant Society of Texas, many of those same people are master naturalists, incredibly knowledgeable, and might be able to answer questions about specific plants. If you're new at identifying species on your property, I have spent, I think, literally days and days of my time sitting on my butt in front of a plant with a field guide trying to figure out what it is, and mostly successful. Some apps these days that work pretty well. One is essentially the iNaturalist app. Most master naturalists are familiar with that, and also supported by iNaturalist is one simply called Seek. And so they're free, they're easy to download. Even I did it, and they're mostly pretty darn accurate. Nothing is 100%, but they're mostly pretty darn accurate, and will keep a record of your discoveries on your property. So again, thank you so very much, you guys. Thank you for attending. If anybody has any questions I can answer right now, if I haven't driven you off already, I will make it short and brief.
This is about resources. I just wanted to mention, maybe everybody knows this because I'm always kind of behind the curve, but a friend of mine told me today that Elizabeth McGreevy's book on the mountain cedars is out and available now online.
You know what?
Yes.
I just heard about that book. And it's probably going to be one in the next 2 or 3 that I purchase and read, because
what's the name of it?
I think it's Mountain Cedar. She gave a presentation to the Native Plant Society like 4 or 5 months ago at the county office here in Wimberley. Do you remember that? She's been studying mountain cedars for like 25 years or something. She really knows a lot. I know anyway, I think it's probably a really great resource. And I understand that Amazon doesn't have it, but you can go to Barnes & Noble and get a copy for about 18 bucks. Okay. Elizabeth McGreevy.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, like I said, that is the tree that has, I love the internet for a few things, but I hate it because of the misinformation that gets spread around the world. And there's so much misinformation about that particular tree. It's just embarrassing. Even county officials, like county commissioners, regularly give out bad information about that tree. Anyway, thank you for the tip. I think that's going to be a really good resource as far as people who are wanting to manage that on their property.
Hey, Jamie, the name of that book is Mountain Cedars Wanted, Dead or Alive by Elizabeth McGreevy.
I love it.
Yeah, she just,
you know what? You can tell that was written by a Texan. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, she goes way back with us. And I think it's a marvelous result of all these many years she's been researching it since the first time I ever met her way back in when you were starting Master Naturalist, probably 2003.
When we were, in fact, I remember being on the training committee.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But anyway, Yeah, that's a marvelous. Yeah, she's done a lot of work on it right here in River City, right here where we live. So I
Wow.
recommend it highly.
Okay, well, you know what? In another month or two, I'll know a whole lot more about mountain cedars due to reading that book. Well, thank you so very much.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie.
Yep, everybody take care and just keep on doing your good work.